Peut-on dire que la société nous contraint? Can we say that society constrains us? This is a dissertation that I wrote for my finals in epistemology, which I got 17 out of 20. That aside, we have a monster task today because in this dissertation, I go through Durkheim, Freud, Lacan, Sartre, Heinich, Weber, Spinoza, and Bourdieu. And you're gonna see my love for Bourdieu because my entire third section is just Bourdieu. I will present my arguments to you in French, translate it, give you my commentary of how I feel about it after reflecting. What I would also like to do is talk a bit about methodology and how it is that I arrive, or how we are trained to arrive at certain arguments. So let's begin. La forte adoption récente de la carte de liberté plus de RETP à Paris met en exergue la pertinence du sujet. The strong adoption of the recent Freedom Plus card of RETP in Paris shows the pertinence of this subject. So if you don't know, in Paris, we had this introduction of this thing called the carte de liberté to actually get around Paris. So instead of buying like each singular ticket, it's kind of like a subscription based, but the thing is like only Parisians or French people can actually get it because you need to apply for it and you need a French bank account. So there's a lot more things to say about that, but the point of this is that I'm addressing directly this question. I am flattering my professor in saying that based on something that recently happened in reality, in society, this actually is a very pertinent question of how it is that society could actually be said to constrain us. Est-ce que cette adoption est le résultat du choix libre ou bien d'une contrainte extérieure imposée à savoir par l'institution au transport public? So can we say that this adoption is the result of a free choice, or is it more so an exterior constraint imposed on us that is from the public transport institution, which is RATP? Autrement dit, est-ce que ce choix est fait en exigeant notre libre arbitre, ou est-ce que c'est à cause de l'augmentation du prix de 30% pour les billets titulaires? Said differently, is this choice made from our free will, or is it that it is caused by the hike in price of 30% in relation to the single tickets before? Si un voyageur fait ses choix pour éviter de payer pour cette augmentation de prix et pas pour la carte de liberté plus elle-même, if the traveler bought this to avoid paying the price of this increased price instead of for the card itself, peut-on s'interroger sur la possibilité que ce choix est en effet influencé, voire est effectué par rapport à une contrainte qui provient de l'extérieur, c'est-à-dire une force sociale? Can we not say, or can we not investigate the possibility that this choice is in fact influenced, nay, effectuated in relation to this constraint that comes from the exterior that is the social force? So I'm already introducing Durkheim. What I did here is called l'amorce. It's something that you do to lead people into the philosophical discussion, to kind of like show concretely how this question relates to reality. This is more friendly to people than just going like, so Durkheim said this, Lacan said this, after that Freud. It's kind of like, here's the overall picture, and here is why this question is pertinent to everyday life. And this is why we should fund philosophy, but that is a question for the government. Continuing on, il y a une distinction à souligner entre ce qu'on appelle une société et une communauté par rapport aux individus qui les constituent. There's a distinction to be highlighted or underlined between what we call society and community in relation to individuals that constitutes it. And this is my usual technique or tactic, which is definitions, so that we can place ourselves in the world, and also it gives me the ideas that I need to think about what arguments I'm trying to make, because the best advice that I have is write. You think while you write. Don't ponder in your head for like an hour or two. Just keep writing every idea that you have, and then somehow you like bricoler together, like you somehow like make it work together. Dans une communauté ou Gemeinschaft, on n'est pas un individu mais un membre. In a community or Gemeinschaft, so always use German because it makes you sound smarter and more precise. We're not an individual but a member. De cette manière, on est lié aux autres par un lien organique qui est le bien commun, et on est un membre de la communauté ni par choix, volonté, ni par nature, instinctivement comme les animaux, mais par ses besoins communs, un intérêt humain commun. In this way, we are linked to others by this organic link that is the common need. And we are a member of a community not by choice, will, and not by nature, instinctively like animals, but by this common need, which is the common human interest. En revanche, dans une société ou Gesellschaft, un individu tient une relation impersonnelle par l'obligation en ce qui concerne son rôle. Avec les autres individus, I'm trying to do the liaison. French is hard, my God. Avec les autres individus et les institutions qui comprennent la société. On the other hand, in a society or Gesellschaft, an individual holds an impersonal relationship by obligation in relation to their role with other individuals and institutions that composes society. Autrement dit, dans la société, l'individu peut choisir d'intégrer ou de ne pas le faire selon son intérêt personnel. Said differently, in a society, an individual can choose to integrate or not to do so according to his personal interests. So the difference here that I'm trying to highlight is that in a community, we are linked to others by a common human interest, but in society, we choose whether or not to participate based on our personal needs. C'est ici qu'on se trouve dans un dilemme. It is here that we find ourselves in a dilemma. Puisque si une personne voudrait satisfaire son intérêt personnel, c'est-à-dire atteindre son but en ce qui concerne les autres dans la société dans laquelle elle vit, since if a person would like to satisfy their personal interest, that is to achieve their goal in which it concerns others in society in which they live, il faut qu'elle suive la norme de la société, à savoir ses règles. It is necessary that this person follows the norms of the society, that is to say, its rules. Pour revenir à l'exemple, to go back to the example, si une personne veut économiser l'argent, l'intérêt personnel, if a person wants to save money, that is their personal interest, par rapport au transport public in relation to public transport, et si cette personne ne veut pas prendre le risque de recevoir une amende, c'est-à-dire d'être pénalisé par une punition monétaire par un contrôleur, that is to say that this person does not want to take the risk of receiving a fine that is to be penalized monetarily by a controller. Le meilleur choix qui se présente à elle est en effet d'acheter la carte de liberté plus. The best choice that presents itself in front of this person is, in effect, to buy this Freedom Plus card. The note that I made about contrôleur is that, you know, in English, you just think of the word control. And the French know when they have their will challenged. So when we have exams at school, it's called un contrôle. And you can think of like quality control, but it's interesting because you would say like inspector in English, like, you know, someone who just like looks or whatever. But here it's like, oh, even if you're inspecting, you're controlling. But that's just like a play on words. And the other note that I wrote was that wanting to not risk a fine, it's already been taken into account that you want to save money. So then there's this imposition of a chance of you losing even more money that makes you not want to risk like not paying this fine. So you want to save money. The public transport system wants you to pay. We know you don't want to pay because you want to save money. So if I create this penalty or this risk of you paying a lot more, which is also your interest, which is if you can save a lot more by not taking this risk, in place of actually taking the risk, you're not going to take the risk, or at least that's what the hope is. So they know what your personal interest is, they double up on it, and then we see what happens to you after in terms of what we can call free will. Moving on. Le dilemme est vraiment souligné par ces mots de branding, de cette carte même de la liberté. So the dilemma is really underlined or underscored here by the branding word, which is freedom, liberté. So freedom to travel around, like you just think of like why the marketers like chose to do this. Because I always think about like when the government, I mean, I know it's RATP, but okay, fine. We won't make this political. So like the RATP, it's like, I always think about how they're like, they have this goal in mind, and it's like, how do we make people listen to us? And I was just thinking about this, like, you know, again, in the marketing sense, and at least, you know, Hollywoods or ads or whatever, you look at it, you're like, oh, more like things that you can't sell to me. And it's slightly different, but of course it still penetrates into like our psyche. But in terms of transport, it's a bit different because if you want to move around, and I talk a bit more about this later, but essentially the idea of freedom, I'm thinking like there's thinking like, oh, freedom of movement, you know, and also like the freedom to not think about like whether you have enough like tickets on your, because we used to have this pass that we reload whenever we need to. But now it's like a subscription base, which is basically like they are making it frictionless for you to pay. So instead of having to line up to like reload your card, You just pay as you go. And I think about that in terms of, you know, a lot of other modes of capitalism where people try to make things so smooth for you that you do what they want. Moving on. Or, si la liberté est la capacité de faire ce qu'on veut, c'est-à-dire d'effectuer un choix dépourvu de toute influence extérieure, or if we were to say that freedom is the capacity to do what we want, that is to say, to effectuate a choice that is lacking of all exterior influence, et dans une situation où notre choix appartient véritablement à nous-mêmes, in a situation where our choice truly belongs to us, à quel point est-on responsable quant à cet achat ou bien l'adaptation de nouvelles relations avec nos déplacements quotidiens, à savoir notre vie en société? At what point are we then responsible in relation to this purchase or this adoption of a new relationship with how it is that we move around daily that is our life in society? So here I basically put to question the idea of like them using this word branding wise, like freedom, and the actual definition of what freedom is. And also this idea of like how it is that it questions how responsible are we for this new change in how it is that we relate to our lives, because, you know, the majority of our experience, if we're lucky and mobile, is actually moving around. So it's actually a pretty integral part of how it is that we change our relationship to our lives. This little thing, which is public transport. So, bref, which is something that you will not say because it is too informal, but I know this professor and I felt comfortable doing that. But it's essentially saying in sum, so you can say en somme, est-il possible de se dire libre dans une société? Is it possible to call ourselves free in a society? So essentially what I did here is my introduction. I defined it, I used my example, and I redefined the title, which is before, can we say that we are constrained by society? I flipped it to say like, is it possible to say that we're free in society? And this is something that you do, which is called problematisation, which is you basically reformulate the question. This reformulation is just to give you a way into it. So then now I not only have, can we say that society constrains us, but how is that in relation to this question that I asked, which is, but can we even say that we're free? But you have to answer the subject and not your own question that you've made. So now I'm going to tell you my 3 parts, which is something that you do, which is called l'annonce du plan, so announcement of your plan. Dans le premier temps, on abordera l'impossibilité d'échapper à la contrainte de la société en tant qu'un sujet assujetti à ses normes et à la culture. In the first movement, we're going to examine the impossibility of escaping the constraints of society as a subject that is subjugated to its norms and culture. Dans un deuxième temps, on verra la responsabilité due à un sujet rationnel qui a la capacité d'agir librement dans la société. In the second movement, we will see the responsibility that is due to the rational subject that has the capacity to act freely in a society. Dans un troisième temps, on mettra en exergue l'ambiguïté qui compose l'individu social et responsable en tant que produit et réalisateur de la contrainte sociale envers les autres. So in the third movement, we will highlight the ambiguity that is the composition of the social and responsible individual as the product and the thing that realizes this social constraint in regards to other people. So, part 1. Il est impossible d'échapper à la contrainte de la société comme le sujet social est assujetti à ses normes et à la culture. Here, the announcement of plan that I use for each part, I just redid it again and I underlined it just so that, you know, we're clear about what I'm going to talk about in the first section. So, it is impossible for the subject to escape the societal constraints as they are subjugated to its norms and culture. La société est un tout qui prime au-dessus de ses composants, à savoir tous les individus. Society is a whole that primes above all its components, that is to say, all the individuals. Here, if you've read Durkheim, you know where this is going. Dans les règles de la méthode sociale, Durkheim affirme qu'il faut voir le fait social comme chose. In the rules of social method, Durkheim affirms that we have to see social fact as thing. So the word that is important here, both social fact and thing, is comme, which is as if. So it's not that social fact is a thing, like an objective thing, but it acts like it or we treat it like it. And this will become more clear as we go on. La conséquence de cette énonciation est la substantialisation et la survalorisation des faits sociaux. So the consequence of this statement is the substantialization or the overestimation of social facts. C'est-à-dire cela les concrétise en tant que faits extérieurs qui pèsent comme objet bien réel et concret sur nous. That is to say that this statement concretizes or make concrete social facts as facts that are exteriors to us, that presses on us or pressures us as if they were real, like bien réel, like actually real and concrete objects on us. Les faits sociaux comme les impôts pèsent sur nous comme les lois de la nature comme la gravité. So social facts like taxes weighs on us like the laws of nature, and I give an example, gravity. Autrement dit, par une imitation concurrentielle avec des faits naturels, les faits sociaux sont également inéluctables. Said differently, the competing imitation with natural facts makes it so that social facts are equally as inescapable. Dans la variété de la fiction, Heinich affirme que la construction sociale ne se dissout pas simplement en la reconnaissant en tant que création subjective. In Truth of Fiction, Heinich affirms that social construction does not dissolve simply in recognizing it as subjective creation, mais que tous ces faits en tant que notre construction est exactement ce qui fait qu'elle a une vraie présence dans notre vie quotidienne, but that all these facts as our construction is exactly what gives it its real presence in our daily life. De cette manière, toutes les normes telles que la loi ou la règle de la société exercent sur nos actes et nos choix puisqu'elles sont prises en compte en tant que les données réelles qui comprennent notre compréhension de la réalité. In this way, the norms such as the law or the rules of society exerts itself on our acts and our actions as they're taken into account as real givens, concrete givens that constitutes our comprehension of reality. So the note that I wrote is that this is the effect of the abstract that is felt as real on our acts. So thoughts and understanding of reality is how it is that we choose to act in reality. So how like a subjective construction can actually be something that imposes on us, even though we can go like, oh, this is a social construct. Now we have to treat it like an actual construction of, oh, there's a wall in front of me. I'm going to have to walk around this wall because I can't walk through this wall. That's how concrete it's becoming, that it is actually something that informs how it is that we choose to navigate around the world. Dans la malaise de la civilisation, Freud fait une distinction entre deux interprétations du mot civilisation. Premièrement, civilisation with a Z et culture. In The Malaise of Society, Freud makes a distinction between two interpretations of the word civilization. Civilisation with a Z and culture, culture. La première interprétation du mot civilisation, the one with a Z, renvoie au conflit antérieur. The first interpretation of the word, which is civilization with a Z, refers to an interior conflict entre le sujet et son intériorité, between the subject and his interiority. Cela souligne que la société ne pèse pas sur nous seulement de l'extérieur, mais également d'une manière qu'elle provienne de l'intérieur, c'est-à-dire en tant qu'épreuve dans censure instaurée par la culture. This underlines that society does not only weigh on us from the outside, which is the social construct thing that I mentioned before, like taxes as well, but also in a way that it comes from the inside. That is to say, this épreuve, which is proof, ordeal, hardship, or trial, of a censor that is instaured by culture. The reason why I use the word épreuve is firstly proof, so something that is in a way objective, and the word hardship or ordeal or trial, something that one has to go through or something that one experiences and is felt. Dans les complexes familiaux, Lacan affirme que nos relations vitales sont ce qui manifeste concrètement dans la réalité. In Family Complexes, Lacan affirms that our vital relationships are what manifests concretely in reality, in terms of actions informed by our past, actions informed by something that doesn't effectively or concretely exist in reality, et que ces relations vitales sont influencées plus principalement par la culture plutôt que par nos instincts, and that our vital relations are principally influenced more so by culture than by our instincts. Here I'm just making this clear delineation of how it's less and less natural and more like a societal thing. La culture est ce qui nous indique ce qui est habituel dans la société, c'est-à-dire ses coutumes et ses traditions. So culture is what indicates to us what is habitual in society, that is to say, its customs and its traditions. Pourtant, les revers de la culture est ce qui n'est pas habituel. Yet, what is the reverse of culture is what is inhabitual. Ce qui est inhabituel est hors de la norme, et donc c'est de cette manière ce qui est censuré. What is inhabitual is outside of the norm, and it is in this way that it is censored. Something I could have added was habituel is what is manifested, because that is why we know that it's something that constantly happens or it is recurring. Inhabituel, the reason for that is because it is prevented from manifesting. And that is why we rarely see it. And the idea with the word prevent is much more about repression and not disappearance. So just because you don't see much of it, most of the time it's because it's shoved into some corner that we don't look at or we don't want to look at, and not this idea of because we try to prevent it from existing that it disappears. Or, la définition de Freud de la culture est ce qui régule la relation entre les individus. I don't know how to translate the word but it's a statement that you make, like you interject yourself by correcting yourself, but you're not actually changing directions, but you're getting more and more into the details of what it is that you're trying to say. Or at least that's my vibe of the word What I introduced here was Freud's definition of culture as what regulates the relations between people. So here you think of culture as the contrôleur, to make sure that we do what it is that is expected of us, as in our place in the structure that is society. Dans son texte, Lacan souligne trois complexes principaux, le complexe de sevrage, le complexe de l'intrusion, et le complexe d'Oedipe. So in his text, Lacan underlines three principal complexes. The first is the withdrawal complex, or we can say weaning, because it's the idea that the baby has withdrawal from the mother's breast. The second is the intrusion complex, and the last is the Oedipus complex. And all the Freudians are like, yes, she mentioned it. Un complexe est la stagnation au développement. A complex is the stagnation of development. And because we have the contrary of stagnation, something that no longer moves, and development, something that progresses, there is tension. So I couldn't say everything, but I thought this is something I could have added. Il y a ici l'idée de la fixité et de la répétition. So here we have the idea of fixity and repetition. And this is something that I remember directly quoting from Lacan. It's really cool, right? Because fixity is the idea of non-movement, but repetition, there is a feeling of movement, but the movement is circular. And you're on the spot. So you're fixed on the spot, repeating something over and over and over again. So le point commun entre ces trois complexes, c'est qu'ils demeurent en désir insatisfait lié à l'interruption ou l'interdiction culturelle. So the common point between these three complexes is that there remains an unsatisfied desire linked to the interruption or cultural prohibition. Le bébé qui perd le confort du sein, breastfeeding, toujours trop tôt par la détermination sociale culturelle de l'âge approprié de son arrêt. The first is the example of the baby that loses the comfort of the breast, always too soon based on the social cultural determinations of the appropriate age of when it should stop. Easter egg for anyone who knows Little Britain. I had to say it. So, l'intrusion de la formation du développement de son propre identité par des membres familiaux qui s'imposent à la fois en tant que point de rival, mais également en tant qu'indice de son propre identité. So the second complex is the intrusion of the formation of development of one's identity by members of our family members, that impose on us at the same time as a point of rivalry, but also as an indication or indice of our identity. If you have siblings, you know what I mean. And lastly, le fameux complexe d'Oedipe, où par l'interdiction sociale, les parents du même genre se manifestent à la fois comme transgresseurs et l'interdiction de notre désir pour la représentation, l'idéal de l'amour, c'est-à-dire l'autre parent. So the last and finally, the Oedipus complex, which is a social prohibition where the parent of the same gender, mother, daughter, son, father, manifest as both the transgressor and the prohibition of our desire for our ideal representation of love. That is to say, the other parent. And yeah, I just wrote my notes being like mommy daddy issues. So it's this idea of like, wait a second, this person is the ideal representation of love for me, and you're saying that it's wrong for me to desire them, and yet you are transgressing on this very same desire by being with them. This doesn't seem super fair. You're a transgressor of this prohibition that you put onto me. You're saying I can't do something that you're doing. L'idée de complexe qui se forme au sein de la culture qui nous englobe montre l'impossibilité d'agir sans aucune détermination qui provient de la société, puisqu'on est figé dans un stade qu'on cherche à satisfaire ses désirs à la fois refoulés et inépuisables. So the idea of the complex that appears or forms through culture that englobes us shows the impossibility to act without any determinations that comes from society. Since we are fixed on this stage of searching to try to satisfy these desires that are at the same time repressed and endless. So this is where you have the fixity and then you have the repetition, because you are unable to satisfy this desire through all these prohibitions that are created by society. Here's my transition. On avoue le caractère inéluctable, inévitable de la contrainte sociale culturelle qui s'exerce sur tous nos actes et nos choix, à la fois de l'extérieur et de l'intérieur dans la société. We have seen the inescapable character of this social cultural constraint that exerts itself on our actions and our choices at the same time from the exterior and the interior in society. Pourtant, yet, comment expliquer donc les manifestations différentes, voire singulières de comportement dans notre société? And yet, how are we to explain these different manifestations, nay, singular manifestations of behavior in our society? Autrement dit, si le fait social agit sur nous comme une loi naturelle, said differently, if social facts acts on us like a natural law, n'implique-t-il donc que les résultats en tant que comportement parmi tous les individus dans la société doivent rester homogènes? Does that not imply that the result in terms of the behaviors of all individuals in society should remain homogeneous, the same? Pour donner un exemple concret, comment expliquer le free rider dans la société, celui qui prend le risque malgré les contrôleurs de la société, et les individus qui se marient avec quelqu'un qui ne ressemble guère à leurs parents? To give a concrete example, I actually gave two. How do we explain the free rider? So a person who, jumps through the gates, a person who just doesn't actually pay, the person who understands that everyone else is doing their social duty, but they're like, I don't see the point in this, so they don't actually adhere to it. And the individuals who marry someone who barely resembles their parents. So this is the end of part 1. My recording is at 40 minutes plus, so I'm going to cut this into 2 parts. I hope this was helpful to you, and I hope to see you in the second section where I'll talk about, firstly, yes, we are actually free and responsible, and secondly, maybe it's a bit ambiguous, but there's actually something a lot more than being responsible of our actions, but that we ourselves are responsible for this social constraint on ourselves and on others.